Hello, my name is Armando, and I'm going to be joined by Braden today, and we are going to be discussing the topic of high levels of nitrate and phosphorus found in waterways and wells near farms, orchards, and dairies. Now, me myself, I have a lot of family who live around orchards and farms around Toppenish, so the water that they draw from could be contaminated with high levels of nitrate, as well as the streams surrounding their houses. And then others, Yakima County in general has lots of orchards and farms, so pesticides and other chemicals used to increase crop yield and protect the crops could be washed down into nearby wells and waterways, killing aquatic life and ruining wells. Some background on this topic are that wells within a mile of dairies have high nitrate levels way above the regulated 10 parts per million, reaching a point as high as 180 parts per million. This in itself is a very high amount, as it can go over to about 18 times the regulated amount. And this affects people tremendously who rely on private wells for their water. One example of this would be Martin Yanez and his sister Rosalinda, who owned a private well behind their home in Zilla, which was contaminated with high levels of nitrates. Their water started to smell funky, and they had to rely on bottled water instead of their well, which in turn made them spend more money than they wanted to for the service they already should have had. Another problem is that there is no agency to monitor contaminants in the wells, so it's up to the well owner to monitor and clean up their own water from the contaminants of farms, orchards, and dairies. And they can't use regular water filters or even boil the water, since filters can't filter out nitrates, and boiling only increases the nitrate concentration in the water. People who own private wells are also stuck, and they can't really buy a filter to get rid of the nitrate, as what they require is a reverse osmosis filter, which goes around for $12,000 and $18,000. So that in itself is very expensive, and most people don't just have that kind of money lying around to fix a well that wasn't even messed up from their own problem.
And so it's not other agencies or government entities that step in and provide for this, or the farmers themselves. It's everybody has to privately pay for the damages themselves to their own wells, even though they didn't cause it.
Yeah, even though that they didn't cause like the high levels of nitrate and stuff, just by them living near the farms, I guess it became their problem, even though like they didn't have anything to do with it. So the farms can just go around and have all their waste washed off into like the nearby streams, which then goes into like the underwater reservoirs that the wells draw from. And so the people that own the wells, they have to bring in their own money and somehow pay for it to fix their wells.
Why aren't the farmers held accountable at all? It's just they don't.
There is no piece of legislation around right now to actually hold them accountable, and so they know of the issue, but there's like nothing requiring them to step in and fix their problem.
Okay. What are some like health effects on people from this?
Well, waters that have high levels of nitrate, like when ingested and like taken in by people who drink it, it can result in blue baby syndrome, in which the red blood cells cannot carry oxygen as well, and it basically makes it so it results in, like, for infants, the reason why it's called blue baby syndrome is that their skin begins to turn blue due to the lack of oxygen, and over time, if left untreated, it can be lethal.
Is it just infants or small children too, or are adults affected at all that much?
Well, not really, since adults and children, they can replace the red blood cells faster than infants can, so it's not really much of an issue. But repeated exposure could still have harmful effects.
Mm-hmm. Do they? So they're not. So the farmers that cause the pollution aren't required to pay for the damages to the wells, but do they have to pay for any like health damages or anything for the children often? Like, do they have to pay to treat the blue baby syndrome at all?
That falls on the hands of the owners and the people who become affected, as it's their well, and there's not really any way to help hold them accountable.
And so if there was since there's no legislation at all, if they were to like have a lawsuit about the problem, they would lose because there's no grounds to fight them on it.
Yeah, even then, if they were to try to have a lawsuit, most people who are having this like the problem don't have the money to even
Yeah.
go through the whole like court process and have a chance of winning, since it's a small family going against a big corporation.
Mm. Okay.
It's not just farms that result in the high levels of nitrate and waste being run off into the nearby water, since the pesticides from orchards that end up running off during rains and the sprinkler systems that they use are also part of it, as well as the fertilizers used in farms, which have high levels of nitrates and phosphates in them in order to enrich the soil, but excess fertilizer is ran off during the irrigation of the fields.
Mm-hmm.
Or when the rains come down, and then the water from that, or the nitrates and phosphates from that, then seep into the water and cause kill zones in nearby streams, which can in turn kill aquatic animal and plant life. Some further action that needs to be taken would be, first off, that the people need to be compensated by dairies, farms, and orchards whose waste has contaminated the wells, as they themselves cannot provide for the reverse osmosis filter.
Yeah, and so this kind of goes back to that thing we watched on the fracking, in that the companies don't hold themselves accountable, and they just they claim. Is it kind of like how they claim ignorance of it, like they didn't know it was happening?
Yeah,
Or
like there's no way to basically prove that it was them, that it could just be a coincidence, and so they don't really have to go in and fix their problems.
Okay.
Another solution that needs to be taken would be like just managing the use of fertilizer more efficiently in order to minimize nitrate and phosphorus waste being run down into streams and going underground, since putting too much can result in just the excess waste being just run down, and then putting it inefficiently just doesn't help fix the problem. And farmers need to mix combinations of cover crops such as legumes to add nitrogen to the soil and non-legumes to remove nitrogen and balance it out, as this would prevent erosion and loss of nitrogen and phosphorus, which then would go into the water. Since having too much nitrogen can end up killing plants, and with the plants dying too early, erosion is a huge problem. And then if there's too little nitrogen, the plants will also end up dying, since they don't have enough nutrients to support their growth. Farmers also need to adopt nutrient management techniques to maximize efficiency and reduce amount wasted and washed off, so that they're not putting too much or too little, and they're actually being methodical about it.
Okay.
Another solution which would help prevent the runoff would just be planting field buffers around fields, like trees and shrubs, to prevent nutrient loss, so that in case some of the runoff in case some of the nutrients are ran off, it is then caught by the trees and shrubs, so that the nutrients are still in the field and not just being seeped into the water.
Okay. And with the legumes, what would they do with those to make it? Like, how would they plant those? Would they like do a crop cycle? Like,
Yes, they would.
Certain times a year. Or...
Yes, they would need to cycle the different cover crops like year round.
Okay.
So that there's not too much nitrogen in the soil and not too little. They would need to find a balance in order to make the soil as balanced as they can.
Okay, so they wouldn't have to plant them at the same time. It's just alternating from the main crop.
Yeah, they would have to alternate between the main crop and stuff in order to help their growth and just prevent the whole erosion. Because when they end up harvesting their crops, if they don't have any cover crops to hold the soil in place, then the erosion will occur and it'll just end up being seeped into the streams.
Okay.
Another solution would be blocking off grazing animals from streams to stop them from putting waste into them, and just overall ruining the water quality, which would then seep into larger bodies of water like rivers. Some of the challenges with these solutions are the fact that all of them are pretty much voluntary, and it all depends on the farmers and dairy owners and the owners of the orchards to want to do it, because they don't have to, since there's nothing holding them.
They can't. Yeah, they can't hold themselves accountable.
Yeah, there's
Or
nothing.
they don't want to.
Forcing their hand to do it.
Okay.
It's just like whether or not they want to. And even for these proposed plans, it's been they've been planning this out by going to conferences and meetings with other people around Yakima County, but they've missed their deadline twice over the last 6 years. So the question of like whether or not it's actually going to happen, and the bigger question is when will they actually start trying to fix all the problems that they've created, and it's just not sure.
So we need to kind of find a way to get them to hold themselves accountable by law, because they're not going to do it themselves, and they're not showing any effort in trying to fix it. So do you think like legislation needs to be passed or something that to make them change it?
Yes, for sure. Legislation needs to be passed in order to actually force their hand to start taking preventative measures and just overall improve the farming techniques that they use.
Mm-hmm.
Since they don't have to now, so why would they change the things that they've been doing for years?
I find that interesting that they haven't been held accountable all this time, and they don't pay for damages, and they can get away with that. It's just interesting.
Yeah, it's just what a lack of like legislation does is that in order to like maximize their profits and just improve how they run themselves, they don't really have to worry about all the health issues, since they're not the ones being affected, it's the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the consequences of inaction would be that if more waste is run off into streams and the nitrate levels in them reach at least 80 parts per million, fish will begin to die and more plant life will be destroyed, since any levels of nitrate between like 0 to 40 are not lethal to fish. Mm-hmm. They can handle that just fine, but if it once it reaches that 80 parts per million point, their bodies can't take it and they'll begin to die. And going back to the high nitrate levels in like well water, and how it can lead to blue baby syndrome, it can also affect like adults who have health conditions like ulcers or gastritis, or if they have kidney failures requiring dialysis, or just a genetic predisposition to the blue baby syndrome. They're at risk of lethargy, vomiting, loss of consciousness, difficulty breathing, seizures, and increased salivation. And it just overall poses a health risk to those who already aren't doing so well themselves.
Okay. So my question about the people again is kind of like, is there a certain high level of nitrogen that can like affect adults or anything like that? Like, is there, I know you said earlier that it's mostly infants, but what level makes it to where more people are affected with nitrogen?
Well, usually it's not that big of an issue, but like the regulated amount that should be in like any water that people are drinking from or using for like any reason is 10 parts per million.
Okay.
So anything above that and just repeated exposure, like say you're only drawing water from your well and that's what you use to cook your food or just drink in general, like that could just cause harmful effects over time, since nothing is really being done. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that they're drinking.
Okay. And is there any, so, because wells are a very isolated instance of like affection, you know what I mean? Like, not many people have wells and drink from wells. Mm-hmm. So is there any, like, I'm not, obviously people, like the pure water of like city water is made somewhere else, it is purified and away from orchards and all that, but is there any chance that it can get into those and affect more people, like the main water systems, you think?
That's a possibility, but usually, or this mostly just focuses on the people that live in the rural side.
Yeah, okay.
Since
with well water on orchards and all that.
Yeah, since the city water and the town water, all of that is monitors for these problems, okay. And that once it, like, they're not going to allow it to have exceeded the regulated amount of nitrate or phosphates in the water, so they don't have to worry.
Oh, okay, so it's just the private people that are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, not managing the fertilizers and waste from livestock operations can increase the amount of ammonia and nitrous oxide released into the air, which in turn only furthers to increase the amount of greenhouse gas in the air and further climate change.
So it has all kinds of effects. Like, I don't know, just.
Yeah, this is definitely a big issue.
Problem.
Yeah, this is a big issue that has a lot of different aspects to it.
Affects people, affects fish, affects plant life. And then it goes into the air, affects us harder.
Yep, it
just gets worse and worse.
Whole lot of good things.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's going to wrap up this podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you have all learned of the harmful effects of the unchecked farming techniques used and the waste that they release into the ecosystem, not only harming the aquatic life in streams, but also ruining wells that people depend on to get their water. The government needs to know that their intervention is required to fix the problems occurring and push towards a better future, and overall just hold companies responsible for the problems that they cause in order to protect the people who rely on like their own wells to live their life.